for those who are politically wise, a show about the lives of Christians in Ohio involved with politics. Introducing your host, Reverend Thomas Wise.
Greetings, my fellow patriots, saints, and sinners. The show is titled Politically Wise, and I am your host, Reverend Thomas Wise. At the end of the show, there will be a blessing. Don't miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Next time you're thinking about beating the train, think again. It takes a typical freight train traveling 50 miles an hour, 1.5 miles to stop. That's nearly 18 football fields. Don't try to beat the train. Ohio's roads can be highways or dieways. The choice is yours. A message from Operation Lifesaver and this station.
The opinions and statements on this show belong to those who give them. The rest of the show belongs to Thomas Wise Words, all rights reserved. Do you pray for a politician? Do you think a politician can be a Christian? Do you think a politician should stand up for Christian principles? Do you think politicians should pray together? Do you want to see more Christians in politics? If you said yes to any of these questions, please join the Ohio Prayer Caucus Network. Find the Ohio Prayer Caucus Network on Facebook. Welcome back to Politically Wise. The show is titled Politically Wise, and I am your host, Reverend Thomas Wise. This is Reverend Thomas Wise. The show is called Politically Wise. Today we have a special treat for you all. We have David Cortman from the Alliance Defending Freedom. And there's particularly he's the senior counsel that is they have a court case in the Supreme Court right now. It's at the Supreme Court status. The case is Greece versus Galloway. Well, David, first of all, let's find out a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I work with Alliance Defending Freedom as Senior Counsel, Director of Litigation. I've been working here at ADF for about 8 years and doing religious liberty work for almost 20 years now. Basically, we defend people of faith in all aspects, whether it comes to public prayer, as in the case we're going to speak about, or sharing their faith at school or work or in the public square, or wherever they find themselves.
It's 20 years of that. That's a noble work. I guess you've seen the worst and the best.
I have, and it really is rewarding because it's one of those areas, and I always tell people that I have the greatest job there is, because we get to stand with people of faith who believe in their convictions, who aren't afraid to live it out. We get to go to court on their behalf, and we don't charge them. Everything we do is pro bono; it's free of charge, and so it's a pretty good job to go to work and be able to advocate for what you believe in, and so it is a wonderful thing that we get to do.
Just praise the Lord that you're taking a stand for Christians in an arena that is usually known to be hostile towards Christians. I should say that it's not really, it's our government, it's citizens here, but it seems like a lot of Christians have a fear of going to court. Have you ever experienced something like that?
Well, that's right, and I think it's just a view that has been carried over from the church for many decades now. You hear so much, for example, people will say, well, the church shouldn't get involved in politics, or Christians shouldn't go to court, and obviously, we think that the Bible says otherwise, and there's a few things about that. Number one, whatever you would deem to be a political issue is usually a biblical issue. For example, if you talk about traditional marriage between a man and a woman, if you talk about pro-life causes or opposition to abortion, if you talk about these types of things, they are first and foremost biblical issues. And sure, they've become political issues, but that's not a reason for the church as a whole to withdraw from these debates. In fact, the church should be salt and light in the culture, should be speaking up about these important issues that affect everyone, including Christians. And so people do sometimes have that thought about, well, we really shouldn't get involved, or we really shouldn't go to court. But if you look at Paul, obviously, that Paul went through the legal system and said, hey, wait a minute, you can't do this to me. I'm a Roman citizen. I have legal rights, and actually went to the leaders of those times, went to the governors. And so it's interesting, even in biblical times, they went through the legal system to defend what their rights were, and those back then, as it is now, were the ability to share your faith in public, which is an extremely important thing that all Christians should be behind.
Yes, the Christians really need to change their attitudes about the courts and about the church and those who practice in the courts. Someone once told me that a perfect example of a oxymoron is a Christian attorney. In that they just didn't think, they thought that the Christians, the attorneys and at least when I grew up, the attorneys were the vile people of the communities. There's the ones who the Christians and attorneys and judges. So were the ones kicking people out of their homes, and so. It is. You're right. It's got such a misnomer, and you attorneys are oftentimes on the cutting edges of our Christian rights and the Christian battle in our culture here. So I want to tell you personally, I'm very grateful for your time and what you do here. And we will be right back after the break.
To some people, they're just a pet, a dog or a cat. But to you, they're part of your family. They've shared your lives, provided companionship, and given unconditional love. And just like when a human family member passes on, you want your four-legged family members to be treated with dignity. Baker, Hazel, and Snyder Funeral Home and Crematory has been caring for families since 1941 and now offers the same level of service for your pets at Snyder Pet Crematory. Call 274-1151, 274-1151.
The show is titled Politically Wise, and I am your host, Reverend Thomas Wise. Well, let's move along here and talk about this court case and what can you tell us? Well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. Tell us about the Alliance Defending Freedom. Tell us a little bit. Tell us, our people, about that.
We are a legal ministry, and we work with alliance of both attorneys and organizations. We have over 2,000 attorneys that we work with around the country and hundreds of organizations. And we are a nonprofit legal organization, and we advocate for the right of people to freely live out in their faith in the public square. And so we defend traditional marriage between a man and woman. We defend pro-life causes, and we defend religious liberty. And so we've been in existence for about 20 years and help people free of charge. And it's one of those things where we have an entire team of attorneys, over 40 attorneys that work full-time for Alliance Defending Freedom. And we stand beside people and with people when they take a stand for their faith.
Why we got you on thought about it, if there's any way someone will not contact you, what would be the best way to contact the organization?
Sure. There's several different ways. AllianceDefendingFreedom.org is our website that has a lot of information about the cases and how to contact us. If a person needs help with a situation, they can contact us on the website. Or the phone number is 1-800-TELL-TELL ADF, as in Alliance Defending Freedom. So 1-800-TELL-ADF or AllianceDefendingFreedom.org. There's information on both of those locations, both by phone and by email. And obviously, if a person needs help with a particular situation in their area, we would be glad to look into that for them.
All right. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And we will be right back after the break.
Have you ever driven over a pop can? Well, when a train collides with a car, it has the same force as a car running over a pop can. Obey the warnings at railroad crossings. Don't try to beat the train. Ohio's roads can be highways or dieways. The choice is yours. A message from Operation Lifesaver.
If you want to email me, you may do so at politically.wise@gmail.com. Please like us on our Facebook page, Politically Wise. This is Reverend Thomas Wise. The show is called Politically Wise. We have David Cortman from the Alliance Defending Freedom. Well, let's talk about this Greece versus Galloway. What are the particulars about it?
Well, it's an interesting case because it is about something that's been going on in our country since the founding. In fact, over 220 years and even longer of a history, and it's about prayer in public. And it started with our founding fathers when they were getting together and drafting our Constitution and the amendments to our Constitution. They were having some roadblocks, and so they had a time of prayer. So since the beginning of our founding, we had what's sometimes known as legislative prayer before meetings, whether it's a city council or a town council or the state legislature or Congress itself, has opened since over 200 years now with a prayer to open up these meetings. And so in this town, which is in upstate New York, they've been doing so for quite a while now, and just like thousands of communities do across the country. And that practice was challenged by a couple of folks who went to the meeting and were offended, didn't like what they heard, and are challenging that practice of having prayer before those town council meetings.
Who is backing them up?
Americans United for Separation of Church and State is one of the big organizations on the left that is backing them up. And what's interesting about it is that they're not only challenging the prayer practice itself, but they're actually challenge to the content of the prayers. In other words, they're trying to dictate through this litigation how people should or shouldn't pray. And what they're saying is that too many of the prayers are Christian, too many of the prayers are sectarian. And what's interesting about that is everybody in the community is invited to come and pray. In fact, you don't even have to pray. You can come and give an opening word. No one has ever been turned down, and if anyone who lives in the community lets the town council know that I'd like to give an opening message or a prayer next time, they're automatically put on the list. But what they don't want to hear, because a lot of the town is made up of Christians and they're praying, they don't want you to pray in Jesus' name. They want you to pray this, what they call an inclusive prayer or a non-sectarian prayer. And obviously, in our opinion, there's no such thing as a non-sectarian prayer. You talked before about an oxymoron. We think a non-sectarian prayer is an oxymoron. It's no such thing.
Was it a test that only those people who are residents can come and share, or was that the determining factor who could do what by residency?
Well, that's right. And anybody in the community surrounding the town, anybody was allowed to come. And what was interesting is one thing that the Court of Appeals said in saying that this practice was somehow unconstitutional, even though it had been occurring for over 200 years in our country. What they said was, well, your community is not diverse enough. There's too many people of the same faith that live here. Maybe you should bring in people from outside of town to kind of load it up with what we call a religious gerrymander, which we think is not the right legal test, but doesn't make any sense, because then you're still packing the court with religion, although it may be a different religion. So what's interesting is we think a neutral policy is one to say, look, everybody who lives in this community is welcome to come. If you'd like to participate, fine. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But then to require people from outside the community, what do? You ask people, well, what faith are you, and who are you going to pray to, and how are you going to pray? And the government shouldn't be involved in all that type of stuff, but yet that was supposedly the answer to what was otherwise a constitutional issue that had been going on since the founding fathers.
So they would be dictating what words could be used. The government would be dictating what words you could use in that situation in a meeting.
Well, that's exactly right, and it's interesting because the solution given by Americans United for Separation of Church and State is actually creates greater constitutional problems than the policy in the first place. I mean, what could be more constitutional than a neutral, all-inclusive policy, respects all people of faith or not, allows them to come and participate in their town meetings? But what they're asking for is to say, no, we want the town, the government officials, to start dictating what private folks who come to pray or not, what they can and can't say. So no, you can't pray to Jesus. You have to just say God generically, or you can't say anything that alludes too closely to your faith, because that may offend someone. And interestingly enough, there's no right not to be offended in our country. There's no right to bring a constitutional challenge for something you may not like to hear, and yet that's what's being pushed in a case like this, which is extremely dangerous, because if you talk about any religious speech going on in public, should that be able to be censored by the government because someone may hear it who may take offense at it or may not like it, and I think that's a dangerous precedent.
So where was the case first done, in a state court or a federal court?
It was first done in federal court, and at the trial level, the federal court upheld the practice. The Supreme Court ruled in a case called Marsh versus Chambers many decades ago that said this type of legislative prayer was constitutional. So the court, as it was supposed to, said, look, there's already precedent for this. We're going to uphold this practice as being constitutional, which was the right ruling. It then went up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one level below the Supreme Court, and they reversed the decision and said, no, there's too many Christian prayers going on, and the town has to do a better job of getting less Christian prayers and more other types of prayers, even if you have to ship people in and kind of, as I said, gerrymander who's going to pray and what they're going to pray to. And by the way, there's too much of this Jesus thing going on and too much praying that way. And our response was, well, you know, the demographics of the town decides how many people pray in what faith. It's not controlled by the government, nor should it be, but it's an open invitation, and the way it's supposed to be is a policy that's constitutional in one place should be constitutional in any place. And according to this court ruling, this policy would be okay in maybe New York City, where there's a greater diversity of faiths, because then you'd apparently have enough of the right people praying, although I'm not sure how you figure that one out. I don't know if it's a mathematic formula. But in someone else that has a town that's more of one faith, it would be unconstitutional, and that's not the way the Constitution is supposed to work. A rule is supposed to be uniform regardless of where it's applied, and I think their rule they're proposing just creates more problems than it solves.
So don't we have the freedom of movement in this country? And you can live pretty much anywhere you want to live in Fort. So if you don't like what's going on in your community, you have the freedom to move?
Well, what's interesting about that is there's actually more to it than that, and here's what I mean. You do have that freedom, but what's interesting is if you don't like what you hear, you have the freedom to go up at the next meeting and say what you like, and that's what's great about free speech. The answer to free speech that you don't like is not censorship. The answer to free speech is more speech. And I think that's the appropriate response here, because if we get to the point in our country where when we hear something we don't like, we could censor that speech, that's pretty dangerous and no longer looks like America. And I think the important thing here is that we certainly should be as free as the founders were to pray. And if there are people that take issue with that, they are welcome to come and give their opening message or to say something differently, and that's what the great part of this policy is. It allows anyone to come in. And so I think that's the better answer is not censorship, but more speech.
Well, like here in Ohio, they open the legislature, both the House and the Senate, with prayer. And usually you're invited by one of the elected officials. Sometimes the governor has somebody, one of his friends, maybe one of the Supreme Court judges will have someone come. But it's usually someone's invited them to come and pray. And it's usually the makeup of the people who are elected. So if you have someone who's a Muslim, who's an elected official, he'll have his people come. Would this kind of case would stop that kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, if the Americans United and their clients have their way, what'll happen is prayer in itself won't exist anymore, because the government will then have to tell that person, whether he's Jewish or Christian or Muslim, you can't pray to your God. You have to pray generically to somebody out there somewhere, which again is not a prayer, it's just talking. And so it will change all of those policies, because the ramifications of what they're arguing to be a non-sectarian prayer is you have to pray generically in an all-inclusive prayer. I'm not sure what an all-inclusive prayer is, because most religions don't believe exactly the same. And so it would completely restructure all those systems. And it goes on in all 50 states. There's prayer before the legislature. There's prayer before Congress. There's prayer in all towns and communities. And so we're talking about a widespread practice that has gone on since the founding of our country would be completely reshaped if the case were to go the wrong way.
The show is titled Politically Wise, and I am your host, Reverend Thomas Wise. Do you pray for a politician? Do you think a politician can be a Christian? Do you think a politician should stand up for Christian principles? Do you think politicians should pray together? Do you want to see more Christians in politics? If you said yes to any of these questions, please join the Ohio Prayer Caucus Network. Find the Ohio Prayer Caucus Network on Facebook. Welcome back to Politically Wise. This is Reverend Thomas Wise. The show is called Politically Wise. We have David Cortman from the Alliance Defending Freedom. So what do you think is the mood of the court? I mean, they've talked about, you know, I've heard them talk about the Supreme Court having regrets, or that they never meant for, like Roe versus Wade, that to bring about all this anti-abortion and abortion issues. They just really, it was supposed to be just for that one case. Do you think that will be just a decision for this particular case, or it just doesn't work that way? What happens in the Supreme Court sets precedent to happen everywhere.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and very rarely does a Supreme Court case affect only that case in and of itself. And the reason is they're generally giving legal principles that apply not only to that case but much broader, because then legislatures, governments, private people then change their behavior based on what the Supreme Court said. So absolutely has ramifications beyond just this case. And I think, it's always hard to predict, but the good thing in this case is that, number one, this is a practice that's gone on since the founding of our country. It's a little bit difficult to say that it's somehow unconstitutional or it violates the First Amendment when the folks who were drafting the First Amendment were doing this at the same time that they were drafting. So that's a little bit tough to say they were violating the First Amendment as they were drafting it. But moreover, the Supreme Court's already ruled in a case upholding a similar type of legislative prayer practice. And so we feel pretty strongly going in that the court will rely on its previous precedent and uphold this practice, and will not get into the details of dictating the content of someone's prayer, and allow the person to come up and pray according to the dictates of their own faith and their own conscience, which I think is the right decision.
So the Supreme Court has actually agreed to hear this case?
They have, and they'll actually, we're in the middle of doing the briefing right now, and the court will actually hear the actual case at the beginning of November and should have a decision by the following spring.
So what kind of support from the Christian community have you gotten?
Well, the good part is there's been tremendous support from people all over the gamut, and that is we've had friend of the court briefs, they're called, from many different states and states' attorney generals. We've had support from different types of group, people of all faith, states, houses of representatives, senators. In fact, the United States Solicitor General filed a brief on our side saying that this is a constitutional practice. And then from many different organizations we've had support from. There's been certainly an outpouring, and I believe over 24 of these friend of the court briefs that support our case have been filed.
So how will this affect the guy I've termed Paul Pew sitter, the guy in the pew, the person that how will that affect the outcome if the Americans United win this case of Supreme Court? How will that affect them?
Well, it affects everybody, and here's why I say that. The reason this matters is whether you're a person of faith or not, is that this is in defense of one of our constitutional freedoms. And the reason that's important is that religious freedom, religious liberty is one of our first freedoms in the Constitution. That freedom gives everyone the freedom to have whatever faith they want to follow, or no faith at all. And if you start removing both the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech, which both are at play in this case, that affects everybody sitting everywhere, because then what we have is we have more restrictions on what we can and can't say in the public. We have more restrictions on sharing our faith and speaking about our faith and the religious acknowledgement of our country and our religious history. And so it really matters to everyone, and even people who may not like what they hear at that particular prayer, not only, again, have the right for them to go up but that right will be diminished. And so I think it's an extremely important issue, because any time that you're defending one of our God-given constitutional freedoms, I think it's important for everybody to say, well, we don't want the government encroaching on that. We don't want a limitation of our freedom of religion and our free speech rights. And that's why this case is extremely important. Whether you end up praying in front of your town meeting or not, the principle is extremely important for all of us.
Well, it starts taking away in everyday life and everything. You can't even say God bless you when someone sneezes.
Well, it's right, and the point of that is that you don't want a limitation of free speech and free exercise. You want a robust defense of those, because you don't want the government saying, being the speech police, which is exactly what they're advocating for in this case. Wait, you can't pray that way. Who did you just say? No, you can't say Jesus. You can't mention any specific names. You got to pray this general prayer. And even if you believe it's no longer a prayer, it's too bad that's the way you have to pray. So it no longer is a prayer. It just becomes up there speaking and speaking to no one.
Well, sir, I'm supposed to be a 15-minute interview, and we've been going at this for quite a bit. It is a fascinating topic. God, we'll be praying for you and praying for your efforts and praying for the Alliance Defending Freedom, and that
it sounds like you're plowing good ground here, brother. So I will keep you in your prayers and ask my listeners to pray for you too. And as you prepare now, and getting all the jots and the tittles in place.
Well, I thank you, and I appreciate all that you do.
All right, sir. Well, thank you very much, and God bless you, sir.
All right, thanks. You take care. Bye-bye.
This is Reverend Thomas Wise. The show is called Politically Wise. We have David Cortman from the Alliance Defending Freedom. The show is titled Politically Wise, and I am your host, Reverend Thomas Wise. Thank you for listening today. If you want to email me, you may do so at politically.wise@gmail.com. Please like us on our Facebook page, Politically Wise. Now, here's your blessing. Blessings today is based on Psalms chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. May you be blessed when you rise up. May you be blessed when God is your shield. May you be blessed when you cry aloud. May you be blessed when you lie down. May you be blessed when the Lord sustains you. May you be blessed when God delivers you.